can avoid the striking coronavirus death toll projected by the White House if states like Texas and Florida act.
I think the real wild card here and the decision point on whether or not we're going to have the bad outcome that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx talked about is what populous states like Texas and Florida do that really haven't taken aggressive steps. Even now, they're large states. They have large urban areas that have very dense populations. And if they don't get more aggressive, then we could be on the cusp of some of those bad outcomes. I think if those states start to act very aggressively right now, we could keep this hopefully well below those kinds of models.
Need Cuomo.
Mississippi and Georgia have also issued statewide stay-at-home orders. The order from Mississippi comes more than a week after the governor superseded local efforts in his state to promote social distancing. According to state data gathered by the COVID Project, Mississippi has the highest hospitalization rate from the virus in the country.
Let's just up there for a second. Mississippi has the highest COVID-19 hospital rate in the country. Jonathan Lemire, let's bring you in. Also, Jim Vandehei with us as well. Jonathan, this is actually a governor who was contemptuous just a week ago of these stay-at-home orders. He, in fact, undercut some local officials who had stay-at-home orders to try to protect people in their towns and their cities. And he said wanted people to pray for him, but was going to continue to be reckless. It's like, you know, drinking on a Saturday night and then saying, hey, everybody pray for me tomorrow morning in church. No, that doesn't really help. Don't drink on Saturday night, and you'll be much better, you know, getting to church on Sunday morning. But this guy was like, pray for us, but I'm not going to do anything. In fact, I'm going to ignore healthcare officials and everything they're begging me to do. I'm not going to even let my local mayors do what they're trying to do to save people in their town. And now, look what's happening in Mississippi. All too predictable.
Right. The number of cases there have exploded. We finally saw yesterday Florida, Governor DeSantis acted. I know this show in particular has been championing for that for quite some time. You know, there are images even this weekend of beaches up in Duval County near Jacksonville where you could see the line, which counties had closed the beaches and which counties had not. And those that didn't, the beaches were still packed with people. Obviously, a real risk to spreading this virus. There are still a number of states, of course, that don't have this. I believe Alabama is now surrounded by states that have stay-at-home orders, but it does not. And they don't expect there to be a federal guideline on this. The president was asked about this yesterday. He was pressed on it in the White House briefing, and he said that he wanted to continue to defer to the states. He and the vice president, they said, well, they believe in federalism, that the state's governors should make their own decisions, and that the White House, at least for now, was not going to impose a national stay-at-home order, even though there is mounting pressure, even from within the own administration, from Dr. Fauci, from Dr. Birx, behind closed doors, suggesting that is what is needed right now. Because, as we've been documenting, right now, yes, the hot spots are in a lot of these big cities on the coasts, but they're spreading. And they're eventually will head to states that don't have the medical capabilities, the healthcare capabilities that, say, New York City does. New York City's hospitals are overrun right now. There's no question. But there is at least the capacity to handle an influx of people. Other states, less density, sure, but also perhaps doesn't have the adequate healthcare system for the influx of patients that are surely coming. But at least for now, the president continues to want to put the onus on the states. We saw that in terms of medical equipment, his slowness to invoke the Defense Production Act. He still wants the states to be responsible to find respirators, to find masks. And at least now, even though the president extended the stay-at-home guidelines suggestions through April 30th, there doesn't seem to be an order coming from Washington that will require all citizens to follow.
So the problem with that, Mika, is, of course, that people travel across state lines. And as you travel across state lines, you take the virus with you and you affect other people in new states. Also, the president we've talked about this for a very long time, the president relying on 50 governors, it's a patchwork approach, and it doesn't make any sense. And, you know, it was the president who got the intel briefings in January warning him.
Right.
It wasn't governors, it wasn't Governor Tate. It was the president that got the warnings back in January. It was a president who has actually a Secretary of Health and Human Services that tried to talk to him starting in early January, and the president wouldn't talk to him for 2 weeks about the coronavirus. And when he did, all he wanted to do was talk about vaping. But the president had everybody around him in the White House in January warning him about this, and he kept ignoring it, of course, and said, I'm going to push it off to the states. Well, there's not a state approach to a pandemic. It's a national crisis. That pandemic sweeps across county lines. It sweeps across state lines. It infects people, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, whether they're in red states or blue states. And taking this piecemeal patchwork approach to a pandemic just doesn't work.
Well, the other risk is that, it's not like every governor is Governor Cuomo. You had DeSantis in Florida, weak, feckless leadership, waiting for directives from the government, literally waiting as people went to the beaches and began to, this decision by this governor in Florida, waiting for Trump to tell him what to do, is going to lead to people losing their lives. He should have done more. He should have been engaged. He should have understood the virus. He didn't. And then there's this. Georgia's governor also relented and issued a statewide order after the southwestern part of the state was identified as a national hotspot. And get this. In a stunning admission, Governor Brian Kemp says he only just learned that asymptomatic people can transmit the virus.
I think it's the reason I'm taking this action. Just like I've continued to tell people, I'm following the data, I'm following the advice of Dr. Toomey. Her and I both mentioned in our remarks, finding out that this virus is now transmitting before people see signs. So what we've been telling people from directives from the CDC for weeks now, that if you start feeling bad, stay home. Those individuals could have been infecting people before they ever felt bad. Well, we didn't know that until the last 24 hours. And as Dr. Toomey told me, she goes, this is a game changer for us.
My God,
Willie,
my God.
Willie, where do I begin? Where do I begin? Everybody, haven't we heard this from Dr. Fauci? Haven't we heard this from Dr. Birx? I'm sure the president's even said it. Pence's vice president even said, everybody's been saying you can,
What's
right?
he been
If I'm
doing?
wrong, correct me.
Has he been doing his job?
But haven't we known for some time that people who are asymptomatic can pass this on? Isn't that when we watch TV and hear the doctors, they all warn that you can have it, and one of the dangers is that it's asymptomatic and you can pass it on without even knowing you're passing it on. Deborah Birx,
Why we need testing.
warning that children and teenagers are often asymptomatic, and they can catch it and pass it along to all of these other people without even knowing it. And so this Georgia governor yesterday says, we just found out yesterday, and it's a game changer. I can tell you,
Is that a joke?
a native of Georgia, that's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, of course you're right. We've known for weeks and weeks and weeks that you can be asymptomatic and carried around with you. But what Governor Kemp is doing there is covering for his rhetoric of the last weeks and weeks and weeks, where he effectively has said, along with the governor of Mississippi and Governor DeSantis in Florida, we're not going to let some flu bug shut down our state. You know, there's been like almost a swagger to the way they've talked about it. We're not going to be like New York and these other places. The problem is it can be carried in asymptomatic people, and it will come to Atlanta.
And we've known
It is
that.
coming to Mississippi, as you just read, and we've known that, and we've known that. And what you're seeing, Joe, is what we said yesterday morning, the power of President Trump, specifically with Governor DeSantis, who is grateful to President Trump. He believes he helped him become governor of the state of Florida with his campaigning. President Trump knows he needs Florida. President Trump picked up the phone yesterday, called Governor DeSantis, and compelled him to shut down the state. Once that was done, the governors of Georgia and Mississippi did the same. So that is the power of President Trump over certain governors, over certain populations. What he says becomes law. And Jim Vandehei, the president, has an incredible power, as we've been trying to sort of say to him on this show over the last few weeks, to set in motion the kind of action that happened yesterday, to stop governors, to save them from themselves, to save their populations by shutting down their states. And it looks like finally yesterday the president did make that phone call to Governor DeSantis, and the dominoes fell from there.